The Jihad of a Gay Muslim. The condemnation of homosexual acts in Islam has traditionally been supported by the Sharia of law in the Quran, in which corrupt men from Saddam sought to sexually assault Lot's guests. The Quran states, "Do you really lust after men instead of women? In fact, you are only a people acting ignorantly." Classical Islamic scholars have historically interpreted these verses as a clear prohibition of same-sex relations, and as a result, homosexual acts are considered haram, forbidden. Several hadiths are also frequently cited to reinforce this position, including one that reads, "Kill the doer and the receiver." In countries governed by strict interpretations of Islamic law, homosexuality may even be punishable by death. However, some contemporary scholars and Muslim thinkers argue that the sin condemned in Lot's story was not consensual same-sex behavior, but rather sexual violence and coercion, and they question the reliability of the hadiths used to support traditional views. These reinterpretations often encounter significant resistance within the broader Muslim community, compelling many gay Muslims to conceal their sexuality. In this video, I will recount the experiences of 3 men who have shared their struggles living as gay Muslims. Since 1965, Egyptian law has increasingly been based on Sharia law, as many Egyptians believed that their defeat in the Six-Day War of 1967 was divine punishment for the country's embrace of secularism, socialism, and nationalism. As a result, homosexuality became criminalized under the category of fajr, meaning excessive acts of pleasure. In 2001, a tragic event known as Cairo 52 took place, in which several gay men were arrested at a disco and charged with debauchery. A gay Egyptian Muslim named Mazen recounts that he and a friend were waiting outside the disco when they saw police officers approaching. They were arrested and taken to the police station, where they were brutally interrogated. The police called them slurs such as faggots, and anyone who denied the accusation was beaten with pipes and belts until they confessed, saying, "I am a faggot." Mazen was convicted and sentenced to 1 year in prison, during which he was raped repeatedly. After completing his first sentence, he was retried and sentenced to an additional 3 years. Unable to endure the continued persecution, Mazen eventually escaped to France, where homosexual acts between consenting adults are legal. There he lived with friends for 3 years before obtaining his own apartment. In a phone call with his mother, Mazen expressed his gratitude to Allah, making it clear that he felt Allah accepted him as a gay man, despite Sharia law's condemnation of homosexuality. Mazen is one of many gay Muslims who remain strong in their faith but are forced to flee their home countries in search of places where their sexuality is not treated as a crime or a sin. A similar event took place in Iran in 2004. Since 1779, Iran's laws have been based on conservative interpretations of Islamic law, and as a result, homosexual acts are illegal. Punishments for such acts vary in severity but can be extremely harsh. A gay Muslim named Amir was attending a party when the police raided the gathering and arrested him. At his hearing, the judge declared that a physician would examine the men to determine if they were gay, and warned that if found guilty, they could be sentenced to death by stoning. Although it is medically impossible for a physician to determine someone's sexual orientation, the judge's statement was likely an intimidation tactic aimed at forcing confessions to justify severe punishments. Amir ultimately received 100 lashes within the span of an hour, a punishment severe enough to have been fatal. When Amir showed his back to his mother, she wept, not wanting to continue causing her pain. He fled to Turkey with 3 friends, 2 of whom were married to each other. His stay was temporary, however, while awaiting a decision from the United Nations Refugee Agency on whether he would be granted asylum. Although Turkey was officially a secular state where homosexuality had been legal since 1923, its majority Muslim population and ongoing history of discrimination and hostility towards LGBTQ+ individuals complicated its reputation as a safe haven. As a result, each day in Turkey was filled with anxiety for him, as he feared not only his own safety, but also for the well-being of his family back home, who could be prosecuted because of his sexuality. Eventually, the married couple and Amir were approved for asylum in Canada, but Amir chose to remain in Turkey a bit longer to support his friend Mujtaba while he awaited his final decision. Although thrilled to begin a new life, the couple also felt sorrow leaving their friends behind. At the embassy, when asked what they planned to do in Canada, one of them simply replied, "Breathe." Later, they reflected with sadness on the many gay Muslims who remain trapped in environments where they cannot live freely. While they were fortunate to survive and find refuge in a country where homosexuality is not criminalized, many others are not as lucky, facing death by stoning or lashing under interpretations of religious law that command kill the doer and the receiver. In contrast to the previous accounts, this final narrative centers on a deeply personal journey of faith and self-acceptance, that of Parvez Sharma, the filmmaker who documented the stories of the two gay Muslims aforementioned. Though he now resides in New York, Sharma was raised in India within a community shaped by Sufi traditions and identifies as a Sunni Muslim. He eventually married an American atheist, a union he believes would have deeply disappointed his mother, who passed away before the marriage took place. Sharma continues to wrestle with the belief that the shame surrounding his sexuality may have contributed to her death, as she never forgave him for being gay. In her letters, written while he lived in the United States, she repeatedly expressed hope that he would change. Burdened by this guilt and seeking spiritual reconciliation, Sharma chose to undertake the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, a sacred obligation for all Muslims who are physically and financially able to complete it at least once in their lifetime. The journey was fraught with risks, given that Mecca lies in Saudi Arabia, a country governed by Wahhabi Islam, where homosexuality is punishable by death. And Sharma's documentary, A Jihad for Love, had already been released prior to his visit. Nevertheless, he embarked on the pilgrimage, motivated by the widespread belief that completing the Hajj cleanses one of all prior sins, a powerful notion for someone who had internalized the view that his sexuality was a grave spiritual transgression. He undertook the pilgrimage alongside a group of Shia Muslims, another community frequently marginalized within dominant Sunni frameworks, further intensifying the symbolic and personal weight of the experience. In an act of defiance and spiritual testimony, Sharma chose to document the pilgrimage despite strict prohibitions against filming in Mecca. Throughout the journey, he received repeated warnings from guards and fellow pilgrims, yet he persisted in recording the key rites, including circling the Kaaba 7 times, walking between the hills of Safa and Marwa, praying in the Grand Mosque, casting pebbles at the 3 pillars representing the rejection of evil, and performing the ritual animal sacrifice, an act that troubled him deeply due to his ethical concerns around the taking of life. Upon completing the pilgrimage, Sharma experienced a profound shift in perspective. The question was no longer whether Islam could accept him as a gay man, but whether he could embrace Islam in a way that honored both his family and his identity. Standing in the sacred space of the Kaaba, he felt an overwhelming sense of divine acceptance. Though he had began his journey burdened by guilt, Sharma ultimately emerged with a renewed sense of spiritual belonging, having found a path to reconcile his identity with his devotion to Islam. The experiences of Mazen Amir and Parvez Sharma poignantly exemplify the multifaceted internal and external conflicts encountered by gay Muslims globally. In countries where conservative interpretations of Islamic doctrine exert significant influence over legal and governmental institutions such as Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, homosexuality is frequently prosecuted not through explicit legal prohibitions, but rather under ambiguous charges such as fujur. Consequently, many gay Muslims are compelled to conceal their identities to evade imprisonment, torture, or even execution. While relocation to more legally and socially tolerant nations may provide physical security, the psychological and emotional ramifications often persist. These include enduring trauma, familial and communal rejection, the constant fear of retaliatory harm to loved ones in their countries of origin, and the fear of spiritual damnation. Parvez Sharma, for example, continued to wrestle with the notion that his sexuality constituted a sin beyond redemption. Despite the considerable risk of being identified in Saudi Arabia, particularly following the release of his documentary, A Jihad for Love, he undertook a pilgrimage to Mecca, driven by a deep-seated fear of divine condemnation. Ultimately, through their journeys, Mazen Amir and Parvez navigated the complex intersection of faith and identity, challenging dominant theological narratives that position homosexuality as fundamentally irreconcilable with Islamic belief.